The positive side of it is that I really refused to accept at that time the diagnosis, which was really, you're going to have to learn to live with this.
Hey everyone. Recovery from chronic illness often feels like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing, probably eaten by the dog, and the ones you do find are somehow the wrong shape. But what if one of those missing pieces has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? If you're new here, I'm Raelan Agle, and this is where we dive into recovery stories from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID, uncovering strategies that work and proving that getting past this nightmare isn't just a distant dream, it's happening to people every single day. Today, I am excited to welcome Samantha Keen joining us from Berkeley, California. After powering through a demanding career in financial journalism, Samantha was hit hard by severe CFS in her 20s. But instead of accepting it as her new normal, as so many of us are advised by medical professionals, she found an unexpected path to recovery and wrote a number 1 best-selling book about this that resonated deeply with our community. She's here right now to share insights that you can consider applying today to move forward on your healing journey as well. So let's dive in. Samantha, so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Yay, I'm so happy to be here, Raelan. It's great. It's great to join you.
So like virtually everyone with this, as we were saying before we started recording, you've had quite the journey through all of this. So how did this start for you?
Yeah, I had chronic fatigue syndrome when I was in my 20s. I was actually a financial journalist at that time living in Sydney. I now live in Berkeley, California. And honestly, I would never have dreamed being here. And I do think a huge part of it was what I went through with the illness. Like many people, I came down with a shockingly bad virus. I was in my 20s, so I probably had one day off or something, and I was just trashed. And it just, instead of the usual when you get sick and then you bounce back, which was what I was used to, I did not. And it went on and on and on. And there were lots of symptoms that kind of built on each other, as I'm sure lots of people understand because you've been through it yourselves. And it took a long time because that was actually in the 90s. So it was chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis was not nearly as well publicized as it is now. And of course, now it's majorly taken a leap in public publicity because of long COVID and the links there. So it did take me at least 3 years to get any kind of diagnosis. But I was very fortunate because I was very stubborn. And stubbornness can be positive and negative. And the positive side of it is that I really refused to accept at that time the diagnosis, which was really, you're going to have to learn to live with this. Sort of dust off, the doctor kind of dusting off their hands, metaphorically of me and just like, go do your thing. And I was like, I'm not going to learn to live with this. I had been a very sporty person. I did, in high school, I was a competitive swimmer at a pretty high level. I was still very active and I just went down hard. And I just refused to believe that that was going to be my outcome. And so I went through a lot of alternative therapists, naturopath, everyone, I learned a whole lot of stuff I hadn't been part of my world at all. And it wasn't until I started doing a style of work that was energetic, that addressed, what I'm going to call the chi or the prana, the vitality or the life force, that I started to really turn it around. And that was amazing. The healing journey was really amazing.
So how did you come on to something like this as being a part of your recovery? Because that's not something that really any of us are taught growing up or by doctors that, oh, I'm really sick. This chi prana energy is going to be key for my recovery. So how did you get to that? And then
Yeah.
what does that mean? What did that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such an inner journey, isn't it? So I think each of us have been through a huge journey inside as much as there's a whole external path, that you have to take. And I just want to put in a caveat that I'm not excluding physical treatments, for this illness, because I think it is a bit of an umbrella term and people can have, any number of things that have contributed to this kind of chronic illness. But for me, I actually was traveling, again, very stubborn. And my chronic fatigue by that time, it was a couple of years in, was that I would get more well and then I would crash and I would go weeks or sometimes months being very ill. So it wasn't like at the beginning where I was just sick all the time. And I love travel. I just do. And I just had to break the cycle of where I was at. And I just didn't know what to do. So I was traveling. I went to London. I was working in London in the UK and I traveled in Africa. And it just came to me separate to having the chronic fatigue, actually, that I wanted to start meditating was when I went to Africa, which is where I was born. And I just kind of had a bit of an awakening inside. I'd call it a spiritual awakening, actually. And I had nothing like that in my life before that time. It just wasn't part of my world at all. I was a finance journalist. My mother's a scientist. My dad is a businessman. I grew up in Western Australia, which is much more of a kind of traditional Western culture. Anyway, so I started meditating, and in the meditation, I had a much deeper experience of what was happening as I went in and out of these, highs and lows, like feeling well and then going through what I'm calling a crash or a collapse and then coming out of it. And it started to actually speed the whole process up. So when I started meditating, it started to be that I could come in and out within a few days instead of it being weeks or months. And I remember one time I was sitting there, deep in silence somewhere in London, and this kind of migraine started to come on, and there was people around me, and no one was talking, and I had to sit through it. Well, I didn't have to, but if I wanted to stay at the retreat, I was going to sit through it, and I did. Again, stubborn, and it was just this internal experience of this kind of heaviness that seems from the outside very fast that it descended upon me. Like, if you're living your ordinary life, you're like, oh, goodness, I've got a headache. How did that happen? But when you're sitting still and not saying anything and focusing on your breath, you get right down into the sort of microseconds of the experience. And it was just clear to me in that moment that it was energetic. And I didn't really know what that meant. So afterwards, I went round, a whole research sort of, okay, I need to find something that's going to help me to understand what my experience is. So I was, I think, lucky because I had the experience first. And then I started looking into, and there's, traditional Chinese medicine, which is obviously acupuncture. Many of us have tried that, and that works with qi, which is life force or vitality. The Indian system, so people might have done Ayurvedic medicine, and that looks at prana, which is also life force or vitality. And I ended up doing a style of work that was both meditation and a whole system of subtle bodies that draws from both ancient wisdom and also an understanding of people of the future. And it was through that system that I got better, which did take me a little time to get to full recovery. So I'm going to say 6 months to a year. Like within 6 months, I was back working full time, but it really took me a year before I was just bang on, back in exercise and just all good. Which, if you've been sick for 5 years, it takes you 6 months or a year, that's not much time. And I know many people are ill for a lot longer than I was. And yeah, I'm sorry for that. I hope that everyone can get through it.
Yeah, I was unwell for 10 years. And then in the end, it took me about a year and a half to 2 years to fully recover. And I thought that was so fast
Yeah.
after so long. So the good news is, with all the information we have available, is that people are recovering much more quickly than they used to. So I don't think anyone needs to expect it to take them years and years to get well. I also always want to make sure to emphasize that we do have some really rapid recovery stories, but those are also very much the exception and not the norm. So expecting yourself to get better
Yeah.
in weeks or even a couple of months, unfortunately, probably not realistic, but it also doesn't need to take years. So have some patience with the process, but know that it likely, hopefully these days for people, at least from my understanding, the people I talk to, it doesn't need to take, some people I interviewed, it took decades. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah, we've come a really long way. So in those, say those first 6 months when you started to see that pretty, it sounds like dramatic improvements, if that got you back to working, what would an average day or week look like? Like, what does like your recovery process, your program, you get up in the morning? What does that mean? What do you do in
You
the
mean
day for
now,
those
or
things?
then, or when?
Then,
What
then
phase?
then in those sort of those first 6 months that you said once you started this, you got to a place of being quite well. So yeah, like
Yeah.
what if you were to explain this was my recovery program, this is what I did on an average day that got me well, like in a concrete
Well,
example, if that's possible. I know we're talking about energetic and spiritual things, but just trying to for the person watching
yeah.
or listening to be like, okay, how would I implement this if I wanted to consider this for myself?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say, I'm just going to step back and say, like many people who have one of these illnesses, and I'm not saying everyone because it's, it's a broad range, but,
Mm,
and I read your book and I see that you're also speaking to this, but, um, I'm tend to be more of an all in kind of person. So
mm,
I'm not like just, I'm going to do this halfway, or it's like, if I decide I want to do something, I'm going to go all in. And as part of this style of work that I was doing, which is it's called Clear Vision School. It's a school of meditation and transformation. So there's a whole lot of work which is what I'm going to call kind of emotional deconstruction, and that entails an energetic component. So it's not just like therapy, or it's going to, if you're carrying things in your body, then you're going to go through this process. And the first time I lay down and had a session is called IST. I had a practitioner. I just knew this was going to work for me. And I had done a couple of years of quite a lot of meditation. And when I lay down to have a session with the IST, it was just, oh, this is what I need. These deep, held in sort of energy, emotions. I could see this pathway that it was going to be released. So I immediately, signed up to do a training. And so what I was doing was these kinds of practices, which are a meditation based um, interactive practice with friends in the class. I was doing these practices 4 or 5 times a week. So, and I had a practitioner, um, and I was doing that 4 or 5 times a week. So, and I was able to go back, and there's also a whole bunch of I'm going to call them like skills where you can manage your energy, from a second to second basis. You're learning to cultivate your energy so that this crash or this collapse doesn't happen. And so, for example, I was able to go back first up to part time work as a journalist, which was really cool because I didn't feel that I was going to be able to do that. Now, when I was a journalist, I wasn't a newspaper journalist or radio. I was on Wire, which is now, probably at the end of its days, Reuters, that kind of thing. The organizations that I worked for were like Dow Jones, Associated Press. I went back to part time doing that, which is pretty full on work. It's not, you're able to sit at a desk and quietly, type away. You're on a clock. It's got a deadline. There's an amount of stress that you have. You're in a newsroom. So I was able to go back to that part time. But to do that, I had to do some things to manage my energy. So I was doing a meditation in the morning before I went to work. And I was going into a physical office, the days of physical offices. And was, once I was at work, I was having a lot more awareness of what was happening inside energetically. So rather than letting some potential slump or low, like keep going, 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 and kind of ignoring it, thinking that's going to be okay and just pushing through, which was my old pattern. and I really would push through. I would go, oh, okay, I probably need to head out for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, just get out of the office. It was a huge building. It was very much full of a lot of tech. I don't think it had open windows. So I just go for a little walk, and just lift my energy. And I had little exercises that I could do to lift my energy, or if I felt myself getting really tight. And that's one of the things, like that sort of gripping or tightness. I would do something almost immediately that I felt that coming on to shift it. So just that simple thing when you're at the screen and you're going for it, you're on a deadline, sometimes just that stretch, or just shaking your hands if you can't get up immediately. And then once you finish that, whatever that task is that you may be on a deadline or whatever, I would usually just bang on to the next one and often be doing, a couple at a time. I would get up and go for a walk. I would just walk around the office, get a drink and sit back down. But there's that thing of recognizing when the crash or collapse might be starting before it comes on. And then I was also, having what I'm going to call like kind of micro naps or rests every day when I could. So that was a huge part of my recovery, actually, to have not, there's a thing when you're really sick and you have chronic fatigue or long COVID or burnout and you can feel so heavy. So when you have one of these types of illnesses, you can feel so tired. Like if you haven't had it, it's very, very hard to explain to someone, but maybe it's like a really bad hangover. And it seems like you should go to bed for hours, and actually that didn't work for me to do that. To go to bed for a long time during the day would actually make me worse. But what I worked out through this training that I was in, that to do 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, maybe max an hour, but most days I was doing 20 or 30 minutes of this kind of micro nap where you lie down and you just have this kind of lift off. Maybe you're not fully asleep, you're not fully awake. Maybe sometimes you totally, are out. And doing that made such a huge difference because it meant I didn't have this tightness that I would get into that would kind of precede going into one of the crashes. And it also meant that the healing, the body has such a profound know-how of healing. And that's one of the things about the life force or the chi. It knows how to heal itself if given the best opportunity, given the help. And sleep or rest is a huge part of healing. So having these micro naps every day, sometimes twice a day, made a huge difference for my recovery. And then I would say the other thing would be getting into very regular sleep patterns, like really making sure, even if I couldn't sleep, because you do go through periods where sometimes sleep is really hard. So people can have hypersomnia or insomnia. And if you're in an insomnia time, it seems, okay, well, I could only sleep 3 hours. I may as well just get up and do stuff, which is what I would have done. No, I would make sure that I was in bed for the 8 hours or 7 at the most. I mean, at the least. And I've really worked out that my body does like to have 8 or 8.5 hours sleep. Even now, that is what my body likes to have most days. And I think people are different in that regard. And prior to getting sick, I was on, shift work in the journalism. So sometimes I was having very early starts and I even sometimes worked overnight. And that did not work for me at all. So I got into a rhythm where I was just clear when I was working. Yeah, I was going to work full on when I was working, but I wasn't going to have the 5 a.m. starts. I was not going to do overnight shifts because those things just really did not work for my energy at all. And I think the final thing is, like many of us, I had just so many issues with food, you know. So, and that was just really distressing to get to a place where you can't eat so many things, and you have such an inflammation. I went through a whole experience of just, numerous diets, and I know many other have done that too. And it's stressful. It added actually to the illness when I was going through that, I think. As in, when you have to get so neurotic about what you're eating and what you're not eating, it can add so much unnecessary angst to the situation. So, what really helped me was when I got to a place of, okay, these are the clean, organic foods that I'm not reacting to, that are good for my body, and just stick to those and have a rhythm with the food that was helping me to heal. And it did take me a little bit to figure that out. I must say that for me, there were a lot of people that had a lot of ideas, including doctors and naturopaths and so forth, on what I should and shouldn't eat. And I tried many, many of them. And I think in the end, yeah, I'm totally open to input, but I had to trust my gut, actually. Just like, well, this does work and this doesn't.
Yeah, so many of us go down the diet route. And I got to a point on my journey where I was convinced that every bite of food, or not convinced, it really, I was experiencing, it seemed like everything I ate made me feel worse because I'd read so many things. And between all the information I was taking in, if you took in all of it, I could tell you why any food on the planet was bad for you based on the information I was taking in, except maybe organic kale, but only when grown locally and in season. So it's just,
Yeah, no,
it's,
I got down to brown rice at one point, organic brown rice.
and so much of what you're saying, and I'm sure you've been hearing and reading about this as well as the importance of nervous system regulation. So when we can get ourselves into a calm state, and so many of the things that you talk about are things that I still do now because I recognize it's just important for life. And
Yeah.
I imagine even just getting to that point of finding when you knew you were on the right path, that right there, just you're like, okay, I can dial down the fear by, a good 80, 90% and just relax a bit here. And I notice with myself, because I've struggled with past CFS, then dealing with burnout, having not learned all the lessons I thought I'd learned and falling back into some old patterns.
Yeah,
So,
me too.
so where do you see? Because I know you've talked about, there's some intersection between things like ME/CFS and long COVID and burnout. So, what's your experience or your understanding of that?
Well, I do also work as a practitioner, so I work with a lot of people in this field as well. And my observation in myself and with others, I do think there's a crossover. And again, it's a bit like a Venn diagram, right? Like someone might just have burnout and that's all they ever have. And maybe there's an environmental factor like a work situation or some way that they're not dealing with technology that's work. It's not the technology in their life, it's not working for them, or a
Mm.
stressful relationship at work or whatever. But what I've found that there's a group of people, many of us that, and I have had that. I've had burnout. I'm going to say like a very mild case of long COVID, because luckily I had the skills, I had the experience,
Mm.
and I was able to move through it, a lot faster than a lot of people. But still, I had it. So I am going to mention that even, science is starting to find links between long COVID and ME/CFS. So I think that Australia, as I said, I'm in Berkeley, but I am from Australia, and the Australian Broadcasting Commission put out a report on, I think, February 10th about some studies that show that people with ME/CFS and long COVID both have something swollen in their hippocampus. So they are looking at physical treatments. That's part of the brain. And they are looking at physical treatments for both of those things. But for me, that makes total sense because I felt that they were both in the camp of post-viral illnesses right from the beginning. Because that's is my experience. And when I did a lot of research for my book, which is called Reclaiming Vitality: A Healing Journey Through Chronic Fatigue and Burnout. And I researched that book for 20 years. And I only ended up publishing it last year because of long COVID, because I was like, right, a lot of people need this information. And even way back in the day, when I was first researching it, when I was first recovered, they were showing links between post-viral syndrome or symptoms and chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's on the sort of physical side. I do think energetically there are things that happen to our, I'm going to say, subtle bodies or our non-physical bodies that after a virus can be very debilitating. So if you have like some really intense blockage in your energy, something where things can't flow, but you're kind of dealing with it in your life and it's all okay. And then you have one of these kind of really nasty viruses. And I'm being quite general because I think, you know, there are quite a lot of viruses that have been named as a potential cause for chronic fatigue syndrome, and we don't exactly know which ones are and which ones aren't. But if you hit one of those viruses which really take you down and you have some sort of blockage, it can just really exacerbate what was already there. And along with that, maybe there are some patterns of how, say, take me, for example, I had patterns of how I was relating to my vitality. So I think I was very fast paced. I was very much pushing myself. I was very driven, um, very competitive. And I wasn't, I'm going to say, compassionate or kind towards my energy. And I remember even sitting, with a general practitioner, yeah, a long time ago before I was even recovering, and them saying to me something like, well, you think about it like a bank account. And, at the beginning of the day, you have a certain amount. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be at zero or less than zero. Well, I was getting to the end of the day and being at less than zero every day. And, when you're 17, that's pretty different, even for me, than when I got to 25, 26, 27, where I started to really crash. I had a virus and I was down. And I think when I had the long COVID, which was actually 2 years ago, and I was sick for about, I'm going to say 4 or 5 months after having had COVID. And it was pretty similar in some ways to the chronic fatigue. Um, I was surprised. I thought, oh, I had, that false arrogance. Oh, I'm going to be fine because I'm so healthy. I'm better. I know my body. I'm working on my energy. But no, I went down, and my experience was that there were still what I'm going to call some old pathways from the chronic fatigue that sort of, let's say, the gunkiness or the intensity of the virus of COVID, it kind of got in there and highlighted some things that I hadn't realized were there. So I had to go and address those things to get better. Now, is that good or bad? Is it, no, it's just neutral. It's just, that's where it was. I had some things in my energy and in my relationship to that I needed to go and address, because it's such a deep thing, isn't it, when you get sick like that? As in, some people might get glandular fever or mono, or they might get COVID or one of the new, flus or viruses that are going around, and maybe they're only sick for a day or 2 days or 3 days. And then some people, it could really go on for a long time. And that's just how it is. But what we need is, if we're the people that tend to go down for a longer time, it's just being neutral about it, finding the skills, the tools, the things that are going to help us to move through it. And generally, that has been having healing. So I had a weakness in my lungs, and in my sort of respiratory system that I didn't really know was still there. And so I'm going and getting healing for that. Being aware that when I get the flu, I, I just have to take extra care than others. And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes I just have 3 or 4 days, but sometimes, honestly, it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks. And just being very kind to myself about that is really key. Why is it? I don't know, or I don't have all the answers. I just know that the tools that I've used.
Oh, if only one of us out there had all the answers. I've yet to meet that person. Wouldn't that be great? But yeah, I love that we're all sharing all of this, because together we start putting all of the puzzle pieces together. And so much of what you're saying reminds me of what a lot of people that I interview, what I'm hearing, but just in different wording, is people saying things like, I'm going through life putting this mask on of not who I really am. I'm not living a life or working a job or in a relationship that's in line with how I want to be living. And I have to put up this pretense, or as a female or whoever, I feel like I'm not allowed to express anger, so I'm shoving things down,
Yeah.
or I'm carrying things from my past that I feel like I should have gotten over by now, so I'm not dealing with them again. So all of these sort of blockages or energy or things, different things impacting in your life, finding ways to release that and give it space and deal with it
So much.
is
And
so important.
so much. And even if what I say with the emotional stuff, I don't want to say that it's causal because I think that there has been a debate for a long time, which is probably ending now, but versus psychology versus, physicality. But the truth is that if we're carrying an emotional blockage, and I was someone who was suppressing a lot of anger, a lot of grief, and because I wanted to get out there, I wanted to live my life, I wanted to do the world, but I didn't take time to address those things at a deep level. And when I took the time to have the treatment that resonated with me, that allowed a very deep release of those emotions, it's kind of like if you're carrying around a bunch of luggage that you didn't think you just didn't want to let go of, you're attached to, and then when you let go of it, it's like, whoa, I feel so much lighter. I don't have to carry that stuff around. And so even if it's not causal, it still allows a much deeper level of healing, because you can imagine your vitality, your chi is going into pushing it down or holding it together,
Mhm.
or just sort of unconsciously trying to deal with those emotions and the energy of that emotion. And if it's free, then it can come back to all being available for healing.
I'm a big fan of a man named Cory Muscara. He's a positive psychology professor and a former monk. And he talks about how what you're saying, all the energy it takes to not deal with all the things we're not dealing with. And we think it's simpler, it's a protection. And we push it away, push it away, push it away. And also we think once we stop pushing and we let it in, we have to solve it all immediately. Once we, are give space to maybe some relationship issues or some past trauma issues or some work issues or some emotional issues, we're like, I don't know that. But even just when you just stop and just like allow it all to be like, yeah, okay, I see you. Yeah, you're there too. It's okay. Yes, this is a part of who I am. It's even just that can feel like, oh, okay. It's really exhausting pretending that none of this stuff is there.
Exactly. And there's another piece which I kind of alluded to, this heaviness that you can see,
Yeah.
or I started to see when this kind of crashing or collapsing was happening. And learning to, I'm going to call it uplift the heaviness, like learning to have an energetic awareness of it before it came on. And I literally learned how to shift my energy into a levity, and pull out the
Mhm.
heaviness. So there's not just managing the energy that's of the past that's in your body, which does need to be released and healed
Mhm.
at a deep level. There's also this learning on a daily basis how to shift into that state of levity, which is quite subtle. But once you figure it out, it's actually pretty easy and can just happen in a second.
I started thinking of myself as a screen door, like the old school screen doors that people had on their house. And throughout the day, all these things, I'd picture them, I'd feel them as it'd go through me, and then just picture it passing through instead of being this, hoarder of all these different not so great energies throughout the day of all the things that we all face. I'm just like, okay, someone cut me off in traffic. Let it go. Okay, so someone was insensitive and said something rude. Okay, we feel it. Let's release it. Because you're right. It's not just the big things and all the stuff from the past. It's a zillion little moments
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
And learning that subtle difference between levity and heaviness inside
Yeah.
and how to shift it is so key. So, however, I love your metaphor.
Yeah.
And I guess people probably have different analogies inside of themselves for that shift. Um, for me, it's this really like active, like pulling up, like literally like lifting up.
Okay.
And there, I find a movement out of the swamp, let's say.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love that. So I'm very curious. You said you spent 20 years essentially researching and preparing for this book. So what prompted you to finally write it? And if someone's interested in
Yeah.
this book, what would they expect to find in it?
Yeah, that's so kind. Thank you for asking about that. Really it was COVID actually, because I started seeing in 2020, obviously we were all just kind of going through it. 2021, I think April 2021, I moved into a new house and it was just, I was seeing all the reports about long COVID, seeing people that I knew going down. And I could see this is a post-viral situation, and there are things that people could perhaps gain from understanding that they may look at the physical, they may look at the psychological, but there's something in between, which is the energetic. And if people have an understanding to look there, they can see if that's relevant to them or not. I really understood that the project that I had started the 20 years ago had a great importance, and it was just okay. I have to do this now, and I think I had to go through a whole maturity. I had written it a couple of times earlier on in the process, and I was not happy with any of those drafts. And believe me, I don't think they were actually good. And I think I needed to go through a process of maturity, both as a writer, but also as a human being. And then also in terms of, I've been working as a practitioner doing this type of work, inner space techniques, and teaching people how to uplift, how to release all of that for 20 years, and worked with a lot of people who, so I'm more confident about what I'm talking about, because a lot of people who have had major shifts in their health through what we've facilitated in the sessions. And I think it just really touches my heart to think of, well, people need hope. And that's the main impulse behind the book is, this is the style of work that I do and how I got better and how I take care of my energy. I don't believe it's the only one. I know it's a good one and I can stand by it. But what I really stand by is hope. It's that you can get better, that you don't have to identify yourself with this situation. You don't have to be a victim, and that you can have compassion for yourself. And there are people out there that can help you find your way. And one of the big keys to that is self knowing, because I really feel that people do know. Um, my experience was I knew when something was working for me. So I gave it a couple of rounds. I tried some things in the early days. I tried for a long time and they really weren't working. And then it was just, okay, when something was working, I knew pretty quickly, with a couple of sessions, or, if it's some sort of treatment, try it out a few times. And if you're not seeing a positive shift, then perhaps there's something better out there for you. And of course, there's always situations where you have what's called um, like a healing crisis. So in homeopathy, they call it a healing crisis, where you take the remedy and then you might have a few days where actually all of your symptoms get a lot worse. And that's a good sign, because that means that the treatment is actually addressing something of the illness you have at a very core level. But within a week of the treatment, you are going to see some improvement. Um, and I'm not saying that you're going to get better, because, like we said, it takes a lot of time to get better. If you've been chronically sick for years, it's going to take time to recover from that. That's reality. But you're going to see these incremental improvements, like a shift inside of yourself. And I really want to emphasize that, knowing like, oh, this is working for me. This is this is something that I want to do. It's taking me forward. Yeah, comes back to hope, really. That's why I wrote it.
That sounds incredible. And I am very excited to read it. And that will, of course, be linked in the video description. So I really
Thank you so much.
encourage people to check that out and learn from Samantha's 20 years of hard won wisdom and insight around this.
I do want to say, just to interrupt you, that I did read your book as part of my research, and I loved it. I loved what you're bringing and your channel, and just that you are really providing, that hope for people. I really was one of the reasons why I wanted to meet up with you.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I wrote that book a few years ago, so my understanding of my recovery has changed somewhat. But what people tell me is it just resonates. Like it's like you wrote my story. We feel like we're so alone on these journeys,
Yeah.
but so many of us are going through similar things, and it's just nice to be like, yes, yeah. I'm thinking too. I'll link here a video I interviewed an amazing woman named Rebecca Tolan. She was also a journalist in a really high pressure environment. I see some themes among occupations and ways of living with the people that I interview. But yeah, so another one that I think people watching will really enjoy. But thank you so much, Samantha, for being here. It's such a pleasure meeting you. I am so happy to hear about the progress that you've made, all that you've learned, how wonderful you're doing now, and this how you're just having this incredible ripple effect on the world with the work that you're doing in your book. So just yeah. And thank you to everyone who is watching and listening. And I hope to see you in this next video with Rebecca. Bye, everyone.
Bye.